Hi, everyone. My name is Emily, and Giulia's joining me for this for our first AMA. So
Yeah,
welcome.
first time.
So
Exciting.
excited for this. Yeah, I think this will be a much broader concept that we can cover more topics. We can just kind of go with the flow and get people answers right away instead of kind of going with a set structure. And yeah. So, if you have any questions, please drop them in the chat. We already have some questions that we've gotten. So I guess we'll just start with those. And then if we get other questions, we'll answer them and we'll just go as long as people have questions.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Do you
Yeah,
have
I was
anything?
gonna say,
Yeah.
feel free to leave them here. We'll start with those, but it's definitely meant to be open. So, uh, yeah, I think there will be only a couple of topics where we maybe I mean, I'm not the most technical person, so I will not go in and
Same.
share my most intricate API tips. But
Yeah.
yeah, other topics that are not things that we can't disclose, obviously, but more on the design side, on a general level, are all up for discussion. So I would say, also on career wise, and
Hmm.
I know we had one on portfolio that we might get to.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's pretty open.
Yeah, and Marlinda was going to join us for this, but then had a scheduling conflict, so she'll be joining for the next one, and she'll also be co-hosting the next panel with me. So, yeah, you'll be seeing a lot of her soon.
Yeah, so sorry to disappoint for all those that came only for Merlinda. It's only us.
Yep. Okay. Is there anything else we should mention, or I guess we can get started?
I mean, did we want to introduce ourselves, or are
That's
we?
a good point. You want to go first?
Yes, I am Giulia. I feel like we've had a lot of these conversations, so maybe you've met us before. Usually we're on the asking side of the equation. This time around, we're asking and answering. So it's going to be fun. I work as a conversation designer on the chatbot for Get Your Guide, and am based in Berlin. And yeah, aside from that, the reason why I'm here is mainly that I'm running these conversations with Emily, and we see a lot of your questions. So excited to get to those directly this time.
Yeah, and my name's Emily. I work as I'm on a contract at Microsoft as a content designer, but I work on both conversation design and content design. So yeah, I'm excited to be here and just get these going.
Okay.
Um,
While we wait for questions from the live audience, maybe we can start with some of the questions that we had gathered from previous surveys we
yes,
conducted with you all. We actually have a
we have a
lot of
lot of. Oh
questions.
yeah, we can film multiple episodes with those.
Yeah.
So yeah, our first one is how to collaborate with developers.
Mm.
Um, so I think that's a good one to start with. And it's kind of, yeah, I think on a lot of people's minds on the best ways. I guess there's so many different projects and you can be involved with, and so many different ways you can collaborate in different stages of the project or whatever you're working on. So I guess generally for me, the best way is to just actually start by figuring out who you're working with and who the developers are, who you'll need to contact for what, because you might be working with a team of developers and you may not, they may be like each person may be responsible for one part, one feature, or like something else. So just, figure out who you're working with first. Um, and then set expectations from the start, like schedule one-on-ones with people. That I always try to do that when I first go onto a new project, new team, working with new team members. Um, and just ask them like how they prefer to work. Make sure you're aligned. Like every company works differently, so you might have different ways of documenting things, or different ways to communicate changes or updates to the product. So just make sure you ask those questions at the start so you're not kind of frustrated trying to communicate later. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Good points. I feel like Yeah, I really like the point about like try to figure out like how they like to work, but also I don't know, like for example, I've seen engineers being set on more like specific schedules, so maybe they have like a rotation or something, and like really understanding that upfront of like, yes, like we'll be working together this quarter, which means these 2 weeks I'm available for you to work on this project. Like understand that really upfront, because at least then you can plan around like, okay, I need to figure out like my design up until this point, and then there's like some room for tweaking in these 2 weeks that we overlap and so on. But like have that clear, because maybe for them it's like super clear and obvious, and nobody's asking the question, and then it becomes an issue. um, yeah, I would say just I like to be very honest about my not being technical, and like that I love to work with you as a developer and an engineer because you're bringing all that to the table. So I have expectations in terms of like you should guide me and like what is the best approach for the customer. I try to tell you like the side of the design and like why would be a best practice over what you're recommending and so on. So I think we understanding and like setting the tone for like we're both bringing something to the same goal, and if we can just like help each other out, and open up the side of the equation that we don't see. So like for them it's like the design side, for me is the code side. um yeah, and then I feel like you can be really lucky or really not lucky, and that's kind of like
Oh, I've definitely
how it
experienced
is.
that. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think the most important thing is just, like, don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to learn. Like, I feel like people are very open if you just ask about what they're doing, ask how something works. If you don't understand it, they'll be happy to more than happy, hopefully, to explain it to you. And just like, yeah, um, just take it as a learning experience. And um, I often like some of my best collaboration sessions are with developers because like they're yeah, I think they're very more open than people give them credit for, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, I think also just like, yes, like you are each bringing to the table some like specific skills, but don't feel like limited, like in, oh, I'm the designer and I'm playing designer, so I should always like
Right.
say this and do that. Like I think best interactions are where like sometimes an engineer is like, but like wouldn't this be bad for the customer? And you're like, oh yeah, like good, like I didn't see how like downstream it would be bad for the customer. So thanks for like bringing that kind of designery perspective to it. But I think staying flexible helps with that.
And also they'll be able to give you like limitations and stuff, and they'll be able to tell you like what you can implement in the design that you may not be aware of, or yeah, um, that might be helpful when you're thinking about the approach. So
Yeah, or have these things where you're like, oh, actually I was limited in my thinking, I didn't think we could get to this level of like, I thought we could only do this, but actually
right.
now we can unlock this in a much bigger way. So if you also share, I feel like this is also a good point. Like share what the ultimate goal, like your most desirable outcome for a design is, and then like scale back from them instead of going there with like a small request just because you don't want to be annoying. I feel like that works out best.
Yeah, for sure. Um, yeah, I think those are probably the biggest points I have, and just make sure like keep an open line of communication. If anything, if you need anything, just make sure you know how to reach them, and um, yeah, vice versa. So, cool. Do you have anything else, or I think we've covered this pretty thoroughly.
Yeah, I think so. I was just going to check also on LinkedIn if we are getting.
Oh, you
Sorry, I
just
feel like
yeah,
sometimes we miss them.
yeah,
Um, but yeah, no, I feel like we covered that question pretty.
yeah. Okay, so next one we're gonna move to is which platform how do you choose which platform to use for building the dialogues? Um, so this is kind of like I don't I'm just going to answer generally here. I think there are a lot of things to think about when you're trying to choose a platform. Um, one thing is definitely cost. Is your company going to pay for it? Yeah, how much is it per seat? How many people are going to be using it? That kind of stuff. Another thing to think about is like security. Is your company like very strict with tooling? Are they going to be able to approve the tool or platform? Um, and also, how is it going to fit in with the rest of the tools and platforms that you're using? Um, Another thing is ease of use. Is it easy to build stuff in there? And as a designer, we should be able to have an input with what we're actually designing with. So that's something else. And also, I think the biggest one is capabilities. What can it do? Does it support multimodal interactions? Can you collaborate with people in the tool? Um, does it work? Does it have how do integrations work? Does it integrate with enterprise systems? Can you integrate like APIs and other things into the experience? Um, yeah, I think that's enough to start with. If you have any,
Yeah, so I'm guessing we're answering this from like a perspective of platform for like build and like also like deploy,
Mhm.
not as
Yeah,
like prototyping platform or something like that. Because okay, for platform for like building the dialogues, yeah, I think all you said was relevant. I think it's interesting to try to. So I would say aside from the basics, like I'm sure like if you sit down with your team and like figure out like what are your goals, like obviously if you want to do chat, it should have chat, and if you want to do voice, it should have voice, and like all the things of like it should have, well, maybe LLMs if you're looking to have that technology and all those things. Is on a more high level, like to think about, does it seem like the team there like of the platform is constantly like keeping up with things? Because what you buy today is like interesting, like you're going to start working on that, but it's more relevant to see like are they keeping up with like new technologies and like enabling you to like, I don't know, like maybe today you want to test GPT-4o, but like if tomorrow there's like a new really cool model that comes out and like you want to be able to like keep up with the pace, and there's no like guarantee that you can do this, but like I don't know, try to see like what's been the trend or like their releases or like yeah, if they're active also maybe on social media, and like how do they educate people around their platform. Like those are things like maybe like that are interesting from that perspective. I think definitely like it's important that it's, if not easy to design in it or like to build in it, at least that it's like scalable. You know, like if you have a
yeah,
lot of languages and everything has to be rebuilt, like that's ooh,
oh,
every
takes
change.
so much time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, and kind of like ask these questions, and or like ask them like how they would solve this problem for you, because you can't be possibly like working like that all the time. Or yeah, I would definitely say like ease of design, advancement, like keeping up with technologies. Mm,
Um, Customization,
mhm.
because every use case is different. Can you customize the platform depending on what you're using it for? Um, I think another one, testing and previews. I think that's especially for like conversational AI experiences. That's really important to test like right as quickly as you can because everything's so fast with iterations.
Yeah.
Uh,
I think also on that, like, yeah, testing and like kind of, okay, do you have the logs? How easy is it to see like what happened and
right.
debug?
Mhm.
Um, that goes with that.
And you mentioned deployment before too, like where can it deploy?
Mhm.
How many channels can or like what channels can it deploy on? And if you can't deploy on the channel you need, is that you might need to find another tool.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel
um,
also like sometimes like maybe some platforms have multiple integrations, like, oh yeah, we can do WhatsApp, chat and phone, but really like our strength is on phone, or like voice. And then
Mhm.
if that is like not your first thing, it's like good to get that straight right away, and
Exactly.
like good to know that eventually we could use your best thing, but we want to be using your best thing right away.
Yeah.
um so yeah, I also like, I don't know, maybe this is more of a question on like metrics.
Mm.
um so like how important is it that the platform offers like out of the box really good like analytics and dashboards and so on?
Right. Um, yeah, and especially with I guess there are platforms where you can, like, integrate user analytics,
Hmm.
um, but I think it is important to have them within the platform if you can, because it's just, yeah, um, we need those to, like, be able to make the experiences better. Um,
Yeah, I think so. I didn't know a lot about like all the platforms out there, so I can't really comment on like the state.
Same, I feel like they keep changing, it's like
Yeah,
it's so fast and yeah, but I
but
think, yeah, these
what I was
like,
gonna
thinking about
say
these kinds of things, yeah.
is like a thing I saw in the past when I was like more like looking into different platforms was that analytics was like one of the areas where maybe there was more room for improvement from like
Mhm.
on a general perspective of like platforms supporting chatbots and conversational AI applications. Maybe this changed and like now
Mhm.
they're like vastly better.
Well, I feel like metrics also change because depending on the experience too, and like if you have a multimodal experience, that's gonna be completely different than just like text or just voice. And the metrics you're gonna track are gonna be completely, yeah, completely different. So you need to have like be able to kind of customize them,
Yeah,
but or like mix and match at least.
yeah,
So
yeah. So I think maybe like you're right to point this out. Like maybe it's not like the metrics themselves, but like how much you can um track like and ensure like okay what happened to this conversation, and like kind of maybe see it like from your end if you don't want to use the metrics from the platform, but like how much are you enabled to do that?
yeah.
um I think it was like just because I think initially maybe it was like, oh yeah, we want to deflect, like everyone was just looking to deflect or like contain or however you want to call it. Then they were built like very like in tune, like the analytics part was built very like in tune with this component.
Mhm.
That it makes it sometimes hard to go back and say like, okay, we contained, but like what happened, like actually, like, um,
Right. Yeah, and that's actually another question we had. So maybe we should get more into if you wanna swap to the
mhm.
metrics question, I think that's a good segue.
Yeah, yeah, true.
Okay, yeah, so we had another, questions on, like, what metrics can you track? And I can't get into, like, LLM metrics or, because that overlaps kind of with, work stuff. So, but I can talk about more like general metrics that people um, have tracked. So stuff like engagement rate. So like people just percentage of people just engaging with the bot as opposed to like out of the total number of visitors or engaging with the interaction. Um, Session duration. A lot of these I struggle with because not all of them reflect like a good conversation.
Yeah, yeah.
So, yeah, there's turns per session, but it's hard because you can get your answer within 1 turn, and then it's
Mhm,
like, yeah, but then how do you measure? Like, is
mhm.
a 3-turn conversation getting the information, um, how do you track that difference, I guess? Completion rate, that's also another hard one, I guess. How do you know the customers actually achieved their goal?
Mhm, mhm.
Um, I guess I'm thinking more like complex interactions. Maybe you can measure it better with simpler ones, but I've found that a lot of these like after reviewing conversations, like the metrics do not reflect what users actually experience.
Yeah, yeah, I think it is a really hard problem, like, to measure how good is a conversation, even if it's, like, a very it's not, like it would be harder to measure how good is, like, our conversation because it's, like, the goal is, like, more fuzzy, compared to, like, the goal of a user, like I'm thinking customer service, but like even for an app or like another use case, like it's clear probably like what the user goal is.
Mhm.
But still it gets back to like, okay, for each specific intent you could come up with like a different goal of like, okay, for this one we would like to have this range of turns, or like for this one we would expect X amount of session duration. So I think it takes a lot of work, like if you really want to get down to the details. um, I think also what happens is that you have like you have these like North Star metrics that are more like not associated directly with like how good of a job you're doing as a conversation designer,
Right.
um,
Mhm.
which is like where sometimes it gets frustrating, but ultimately it is helpful to have this like guide that is telling you like, I don't know, it can be sometimes it is deflection and like those kind of metrics, like more related to like how much is the chatbot able to solve
Mhm.
things by itself, and sometimes it's more like NPS, customer effort score, all those survey metrics.
Thumbs up, thumbs down. My favorite.
Thumbs up, thumbs down. Oh my god. Yeah, which it
Um,
is frustrating to like, because you're kind of saying like what we're gonna base this conversation's goodness, like quality, on is like how willing is someone to answer the question, and
Mhm.
um can they say like, can they answer positively for something that is a thing and not a human, because at least with humans you have some kind of an incentive to answer.
Right,
um
exactly. Yeah, so a few others, I think response time is another one. I guess that helps with, like, measuring latency too, and also user response too, like, if they're not responding, um, if they're taking a while to respond, there might like and it happens after the same intent or something, every time, that could be a sign that something's wrong.
yeah,
Um, drop off rate,
yeah,
I guess that tells you something too. Um, how many fallbacks you used, that's another one. We definitely measured that in one of my previous jobs. And if you're like doing something like sales or you have a CTA or something, you can do conversion rate. That's pretty. I guess that's a good measure of like
hmm,
uh, how well it's working.
yeah. I think in general it always goes back to like really think hard like what it is that you're trying to do, and like if you
Exactly.
think about that you'll come up with the right metrics for your use case, which
Yeah.
is the most helpful you can get basically.
Yeah.
um I think also like you can have fun maybe now with like LLMs with like analyzing conversations, depending on like how well set up you are to do this, but like it does allow you to like see, like have more like qualitative insights at scale. And like if you do need a number associated with that, you can start thinking like, oh, okay, how do I want to leverage LLMs in this way? I think there are like also companies that do this like as a service, but yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, yeah. I think it's it's just it's going to be different for every experience, but just like think like Julia said, like think about the goal of the experience, think about what you really want to know, um, and what's actually going to help make the experience better.
Yeah,
And I think, yeah,
I think like the thing is always like, you know why you're working on what you're working, like hopefully. So
yeah.
the metric is more just like a question to help you like see where there's like room for improvement usually, and like it's not that you're just trying to push up metrics to push up metrics. It's like,
I mean, yeah, sometimes it is because the business has like,
mhm,
goals and metrics that they want to meet. So that's something to consider too. It's like, what metrics do you need in order to meet the business goals? And
mhm.
I mean, of course, there are always ways to like skew metrics to to fit that narrative.
Yeah,
But
like
yeah,
I would say like also in that scenario, like question it, right? Like ask
yeah,
someone like, okay, but like why are we so obsessed with this metric getting to this level? Like what is the ultimate goal you want for the customer, that you want for, I don't know, whoever is the stakeholder or the
yeah,
user? Yeah.
Yeah.
If we're driving metrics for metrics' sake, I would say it's like a bad situation to be in.
Yes. But I would also say, like, double check your metrics and just
Mhm.
make sure you're still reviewing conversations and you're still like, you can't just rely on metrics. You have to have a human in the loop. And yeah, really
Yes.
important just
Yeah.
because I've half of my job was reviewing conversations and we just found stuff that was completely different than the metrics we were measuring. So
Mm.
yeah.
I mean, I think, as much as you can like automate like QA or like blah blah blah, there's always something to be said about like just you as the designer taking the time to read like a few conversations. It's like touching the grass. Remember like
Even a
what
few.
it's
I would go through like 5 and already find like 3 issues, and it's yeah, and it would just like there's very low-hanging fruit that you can usually find right away.
Mhm. Mhm.
So, yeah,
Yeah.
it's important.
And I mean, also just like for your own practice, I feel like you find like these issues like usually small, hopefully, um, but and you can fix those. But like it's just like helping you also with the practice of like putting you back in the customer's shoes and like seeing like, oh, the whole time we're trying to fix this, and like our customers are asking about something completely different, but they click on something to get to somewhere.
Right, right, right,
Um,
exactly. And then it bumps up another metric that's not actually accurate, and
yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, we had just last thing before we can
Mhm,
move on, but yeah, we had issues where it would say like a conversation was completed, the customer completed their goal, but when we actually checked, they were
mhm,
going to the wrong intent, and they
mhm.
were like closing out the conversation, but they didn't get the response that they needed. So it was yeah, just that kind of stuff. Definitely be on the lookout for.
Yeah, that like, and read the conversations or like user research, like if you can do
Mhm.
it, it's so nice for this kind of things, like
Yeah.
getting all the context of like what is going through someone's mind, that you kind of assume, oh, everything was so fine, blah blah blah, and actually they just dropped off because they were like, okay, like get me somewhere.
Right,
um,
exactly.
um, so yeah,
Yeah.
if you can, those things are like a must have, I would say.
Yeah. Um, okay, cool. So, do you want to pivot to building a portfolio project?
Oh yeah, I must say I have not a lot of. I did create a portfolio at some point. Am I proud of it? I would say no.
Oh, mine is not great either. Trust me.
So
It's
yeah, I'd be
but
curious to hear like how you would approach this.
so I can speak to this a little bit more. I actually created like a kind of template at
Oh.
my last job to help kind of get use cases and like help people kind of yeah, get the structure, just the basic structure. So what I did, so first of all, I guess a few tips. Like it doesn't have to be a end-to-end use case. You can just focus on something small. People just really want to see your thought process and why you make the decisions you make, and also how you work together with other people to get to the decisions, and also the impact that your work had
Mhm,
on the project and how it made it better. And even if you don't have specific numbers, like that's fine. As if it improves the user experience, that's something. So just find ways that you can communicate the impact um, that your decisions made on making the experience better. Um, so the structure is overview. So I just give like brief description of what the use case is, or what the the portfolio piece is, my role, who I collaborated with, any tools I used, time frame potentially. Um, yeah, just like basic details. Doesn't have to be super long. Um, but yeah, just give a brief description of like what it is that people are going to be looking at. And then here's where I think I differ from a bunch of other people. A lot of people just go into the approach, but I start with the impact first.
mhm,
Um, so I think it's important to have like the overview impact that it had. So you can show like before and after, and then you get into the approach, because then people can see like right away, um, like why, like what the difference was, and then they're more curious to learn like, oh, how did you get there? Um,
I think
so
that's great advice because I feel like it helps like prioritize also for the reader, like what are the ones where I do want to get into the approach versus not.
exactly, yeah. Yeah, so I think starting with the impact, if you have numbers, that's great. Highlight them. Just start with that right away, and then, or just whatever other impact you can come up with. Just start with that, and then you can get into the approach. So like step by step, how did you get this done? Um, and it can be, it doesn't have to be like detailed. Like I know I some people just like put every, like write paragraphs and paragraphs of text on like, I just like focus on what challenges I had, what were we like, what limitations were we faced with, how did we approach those, just anything that's interesting to you will be interesting to other people. So I think just, don't think about like, oh, I have to put like, oh, I collaborated with this like it
Mhm.
doesn't have to be, yeah. Um just put in the most interesting stuff and that should be enough, honestly. Um yeah, I think
Yeah.
that's
I think this was great. I had no doubt that you had some kind of framework or something. It's very Emily. Um, yeah, no, I think I really like your points on like be strategic about it with showing impact first, and then also I think the more like summarized you can be, like the more bullet pointy and like to the point of
yeah,
like this, that, it's like, always an advantage. And like people like you're there to like kind of like spark the curiosity as well. Like obviously like don't leave everything to imagination because we need to
yeah.
understand what was the thought
Right.
process.
Yeah. Explain
Um
stuff.
yeah, yeah. Like if there's like if it's sparking curiosity, like if it's interesting, as you said, Emily, I think it's in a good place to like have a conversation then and get deeper into it.
Yeah, and if you have, like, documentation, you can link to that. Yeah, you don't have to have everything in one place. Like, give people ways to kind of, like, go dive deeper if they want to, but they don't have to necessarily. Um, yeah. Oh, and I think a lot of also, yeah, I think I mentioned this too, but collaboration, like, just
Mhm.
try to communicate as well as much as you can, like how you collaborated within a big team, or with other people. So
Yeah, sounds
yeah.
good.
Ooh. Um. Oh, okay. I think I already, yeah, mentioned what I was going to say.
Yeah.
um.
In the meantime, if from the chat we have any questions, feel free to ask away.
Yeah. We have a couple more.
Yeah.
Um. I guess. Do you want to do like the resources and books
Mm.
stuff?
Yeah, I was actually just recently thinking about this again. I think anytime someone asks like top resource for conversation design specifically, a conversation with things from Diana Deibel and Rebecca Evanhoe is like always my number one recommendation. Um, it's
Yeah.
very like easy to follow. It's giving you all the basics. It's, I think, true to itself. Like I don't know how many years ago it came out. Like it wasn't like, I think it was pre LLM. I don't think it was directly talking about LLMs, but I think the lessons you have there apply to working with LLMs too. Um, Other resources, I I don't know a lot about like other conversation design specific resources, but I did like to oh my god, what was the name? Mm, I think James Vlahos, like this journalist who wrote this book about the history of like talking machines. It ends with him like also trying to build this like Alexa based bot. I found that super interesting because I feel like the more we get into like LLMs, like new technologies, I find it very grounding to learn like where it all started and like what are the things
Yes.
that um, were problems that were solved already that we don't need to solve again. Sorry.
Yeah. Oh, no, exactly. No, I think like it's clear to me that the more we get into new technologies, the more we need basics to kind of manage them, and we
Yes.
need those foundational principles, I think,
Mhm.
that carry over no matter what technology comes our way. So I think that's where we're going to be most successful, is knowing how to implement these new technologies, where to implement them, how they work, and yeah, how they fit into the overall structure of of an experience.
Yeah, I'm hard nodding at this. Like I just the other day shared like on LinkedIn, I've been reading Laws of UX, which is also like very much just delineating like the basics, like the I think it's 10 most basic laws of UX that are like applicable across like UIs, conversational interfaces, anything around that. And it's like, oh, like we know those, like we've been applying these laws and like, or like not applying the law, but like the consequences of the law to accommodate interfaces with users. But it's just so important to like revisit the basics and like on the one hand see like problems that have been solved, take the learning, don't start don't reinvent the wheel, and on the other
Yeah,
hand be like, okay, these rules that we've been following are still so valid, it's just the interface, the technology, the whatever is changing. But yeah, we learned so much, we shouldn't waste all that learning.
exactly. We do. Oh, you know what? I actually do have another resource. I've a bunch of resources that I can post in the chat, so I will post the link to that. But it has like courses, communities, books, podcasts, other stuff. I need to update a couple sections, but for the most part, it's pretty up to date. So I will drop that in the chat probably
Yeah.
after the panel. And we do have a question from Janice. What's the biggest challenge in telling an employer their idea won't work and refocus them? So this
uh,
is kind of gnarly because it depends on how much leverage, or not leverage, but like where you are within the organization, how much kind of power you have to influence those decisions. And sometimes you won't be able to influence them. The best you can do is just bring the risks up to them, present them in a way that shows them exactly like what the business impact is going to be if they make these decisions, like how much money are they going to lose, or what's going to be, or what are the biggest risks um,
mhm.
and challenges that are going to come up, like if this is implemented, um, and just either, if you can present an alternative solution, that's usually very effective, because then it's like, yeah, if you present something but don't give them something else to work with, like it's going to be harder for them to switch to something else if they don't know. So yeah, if you can find an alternative solution,
Yeah,
that's
yeah, that makes sense. Like also kind of like put yourself in their shoes. Like if when you're very convinced of something and someone is like, oh, we shouldn't do it that way, and you would be like, okay, so what are we doing?
yeah.
So I think if you are coming up with a solution, at least is like halfway there. I think also sometimes you kind of have to just like test it. Like maybe it is
Mhm.
something like that you're not seeing and like it's like revolutionary. But you can test it like in I don't know, maybe you do user research first and like you start getting there some signals of like would this work? Like also depends on like what the idea from your employer is, but like I'm assuming like something design related. And yeah, I would like user research if you can. Otherwise, A/B test it with like the smallest possible percentage.
Yeah.
Um, like sometimes you just have to see how it goes, and or they have to see for themselves how it goes.
Yeah.
If
And
something else fails.
yes, I mean, sometimes also like they may not have the capabilities to be able to, like they might not have the technology, they might the right access to the right technologies, they might think it's like going to cost this much, but it's going to cost way more, or like um there may be like hard limitations that they maybe not be able to meet with the experience. So you just have to be clear about what those are if that is the case, and say like it's not going to be what you're thinking.
Mhm,
You're going to have to descope, you're going to have to do this, and
mhm.
yeah, so stuff like that too.
Yeah, I think in general, like if you can invoke here the power of clarity, the power of storytelling, also of all those
Yes.
things that are like tools that are available to you, do it. Like this is your chance. Or like the power of writing, I don't know, to kind of have this, okay, if we do this, then this, or like if we do this, we think this is the reason why we're doing this. Is this what we're saying? And kind of like, move back from like the decision and confirm that everything is understood and you're aligned and we're understanding what it implies.
Yeah.
um
Sometimes they'll just want to go ahead with it anyway. And at that point, you just have to sit back and be like, do the best you can with what you can work with. But you might have to go along with it. And it's
yeah,
frustrating. But, and I've been there and it sucks, but you just have to do it. And
yeah,
yeah.
great
um,
question. Thank you, Janice.
yeah. And I think that actually segues really well into, I think this is our last question. Um, is it? Yeah, I think it is. Um, how to present work to how to present work to various business stakeholders.
Hmm.
um, so this is a little bit of a shift, but I think for me, it's kind of what you're saying with storytelling. Yeah, well, first of all, you have to know your audience, know who you're presenting to, because like presenting to designers is completely different than presenting to like leadership, or even PMs too. So like with other designers, you might be able to just go into a design file and just go through the different screens and be able to jump around. But like with other people, they can't process it. There's too much. They don't. I think we all a lot of times forget that people don't know what we know. So you really have to like walk them through everything. Um, and yeah, so I've personally found like PowerPoints have been just the most effective way, or just slide decks have been the most effective way to present information, and just simple like couple bullets with a picture if you can, um, and then you can like talk through the details. But just present like what are we showing? Why are we doing this? I guess it depends on what you're presenting, but yeah, just try to be as clear as possible and as concise and short as possible. Like people just can't. It's too much overload if if you present too much at once. So
Yeah, I think also like try to tap into like what is the culture like in around sharing this kind of like design things like in your company. If there are frameworks that you can leverage from like, I don't know, product design or other part of the org. Like even for me sometimes like this depends on like what it is that I'm sharing, but like um I see sometimes like frameworks for like from our other teams like in product, and I'm like, oh, this looks good, or like this is already like a way for me to say like, okay, this is the hypothesis we have, this is how we're going to test the hypothesis. Like this is like a very specific example, but like maybe for other things there are similar frameworks that you can leverage or that you can research, maybe, like and once you have a framework and you're always going to present things in that way, I think things get clearer and clearer to like the people on the receiving end. Like they know to expect that, I don't know, every time I'm going to see like current behavior, new behavior, and reasoning and data, and I don't know. If you start like setting the tone, I feel like it gets easier for your stakeholders to know what to expect and absorb that. um, but yeah, other than that, I feel like it's also a bit up to like how it is that you're sharing. Like if you have a meeting, it's like maybe easier and nicer. If it's more like async sharing, it gets like trickier. Maybe a video would be better, so that you give the context and they're not just like getting stuck in details that you're just like, oh yeah, but like that was just theirs for this and that reason, but for some reason that will be the only thing they notice in your whole presentation. um,
that's a good call out. I forgot about like video walk async updates and stuff. I was just mostly talking about like in-person meetings or
mhm,
like virtual. Yeah. But yeah, video walkthroughs too are
mhm,
always very impactful. Another thing is always try to tie it to the user experience or the business outcomes. Whenever you're presenting, like, I guess if you're just presenting like design work, you may not have to, but like I've found that it's really helpful to incorporate user feedback, user actual conversations if you can. Um, and yeah, just do your best to tie it to the impact of the experience for both the business and the user whenever you can.
Yeah, this I think it's super important because I think sometimes you're like trying to abstract things, but like actually if you would have just put there like the example of how bad this experience currently is and like what it is you're trying to get to, people would be like, "Oh yeah, I'm sold, let's do it."
Right, exactly. And just be careful, like if you are just like be objective about it. If you're going to show examples, because you never know who might have done like worked on a bad example.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
do a background check.
So just yeah. So actually, what I've been doing is I actually do have a framework for this too.
Oh, of course.
I've yeah. I found it's really it's been effective to use an observations and recommendations framework. So you just put the observations on what's happening, what's going on, and then recommendations. What can we do to maybe make this better?
Mm,
And this doesn't apply to all presentations. It depends on what you're working on. But like if you're, yeah, if you're working on something, just like if someone asks for feedback or like, I found that it's really useful and at least helps me get started with like how communicating as well as I can, like in depth, I guess what I'm thinking.
mhm.
And then it also keeps it as like it's an observation. It's just what I'm seeing. I'm not putting any of my
Yeah,
opinions in there. I mean, all of it's opinion, but it's just it comes across better, I think, to people.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It's not like fact, it's observation, so
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So yeah, I think we've covered a lot.
yeah, I would say so.
Yeah. Do we have? I don't think we have any other questions. So um, yeah, I know we still have a ton of other uh, questions that we've gotten through our survey and through other places. So I think we can focus on more next time for sure.
Yeah.
And yeah, um, maybe we can also post what we're going to talk about in advance too, so people can tune in if it's relevant to them. And,
Yeah.
yeah.
And I think if there is like if you're watching this afterwards or like if you still have questions, like drop them down. It really helps us to also figure out if it makes sense to do more of these AMA sessions. And
Yeah.
yeah, if it's of interest. I mean, I had a great time. I would do this like regardless.
Yeah, this was a lot of fun.
Yeah. It's also
Yeah.
it's nice to be like more casual sometimes and just sit
Oh, yeah,
and
definitely.
chat. But
Yeah.
yeah, we also would love for it to be valuable to you. So yeah, let
Yeah.
us know.
Yep. Sounds good. Cool. Well, we will stay in touch. We have another panel coming up on February 5th, and then, yeah, we have a couple more after that we're really excited about. So,
Oh yeah.
um, yeah, I think we have a great topic list coming up. So, yeah, thank you so much for joining and for the questions. And we'll see you next time.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye everyone.